Hello, we're back again with Module 2 of FX, and now we're looking at Topic 5, OTC versus Exchange Traded. So OTC, if you remember, means over the counter, and Exchange Traded means via a formal exchange, like the JSE. So with an exchange traded transaction, you have the exchange that stands between buyers and sellers. So buyers and sellers never interact directly with each other. They have the exchange as the neutral party standing between them. And when it comes to trading futures, currency futures on the exchange, both buyers and sellers would need to pay a margin in order to trade. And that margin basically covers credit risk. And that would cover, default risk. So what that basically means is that when parties trade via the exchange, they don't have that extra credit risk or default risk. So that has an impact on pricing, because usually if people trade over the counter, they would pay a premium for credit risk. But because that is removed when trading via the exchange, that is no longer a concern, because then a margin is payable up front. And then traders, buyers and sellers can transact anonymously. So buyers wouldn't know who they are buying from, and sellers wouldn't know who they are selling to, because everyone just faces the exchange. And then the exchange would then take care of all the administration around the transactions. So let's say, for example, on day one, a buyer bought $100 worth of contracts, and the seller sold $100 worth of contracts. And then somewhere in the middle of the day or a few days later, the currency moved, and it moved in one's favor and against the other. Then there'd be an adjustment to the trade, and then the settlement that would go to the buyer and the seller. But all of that happens where the buyer faces the exchange and the seller faces the exchange, but both buyers and sellers are anonymous to each other. So if we have to compare over-the-counter versus exchange-traded, you can think of over-the-counter as less formal and exchange-traded as more formal. So if you have to look at contracts, over-the-counter contracts are completely negotiable. So right down to dates, contract sizes, amounts, everything is negotiable. Whereas with the exchange, contracts are standardized. So for example, if you wanted to trade $1 million via the exchange, apart from the maxi contracts, the usual futures contracts go up in increments of $1,000. So you couldn't get odd amounts like $1,235,000, whereas on the OTC market you could. And then it's also standardized on the exchange in terms of the dates which you could trade, because each contract has delivery dates according to a quarter, whereas on the OTC market you can trade to any date that you need. And then if you look at margin, a margin is payable upfront by buyers and sellers on the exchange, whereas on the OTC market that margin is negotiable. Sometimes it can be built into the pricing in terms of a credit premium, credit risk premium. And then when you look at default risk, on the OTC market, buyers and sellers face each other, and there is the risk that at the settlement date, one of the parties might default and not honor the obligations of the contract. Whereas on the exchange, everything is done through the clearinghouse, and there's no risk of default. In terms of liquidity, because contracts on the exchange are standardized, it's easy to trade them, so there's more liquidity via the exchange. Whereas on the OTC market, everything is so customized and tailor-made, it's harder to sell or to exit positions. So OTC markets tend to be less liquid. And that brings us to the end of that module. If you need any further information or you want to go through some more explanations or worked examples, please do go online and download the manuals for these particular slides.